Fantastic. So moving on, next up, I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Heather Gentile, who's joining us from IBM. She's Director of Product Management for Data and AI Software, and she's going to talk to us about the topic we've heard a few times this morning already, data, AI governance, but particularly how to break open the black box. So over to you, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here today, and really nice to see so many of you in the room looking to talk about how to break open the black box and ensure responsible adoption in AI, which is where I spend a lot of time. Okay. So what you see here is technology that's available today, and IBM is a leader. Imagine sitting in front of your computer and asking it to do anything that will help to make your job more productive. If we look at the past 5 years, this recent McKinsey study shows that AI adoption has actually more than doubled. However, more than 50% of all AI projects still fail. Really concerning number given the amount of investment going into these projects. So what we see is we're at one of those pivotal moments in history, similar to the disruption caused by the internet, where everybody became a lot more connected, or the impact that cloud had on business strategy, transforming the way that people were able to connect to the office. In the last decade, advances in machine learning and deep learning have led to significant progress in AI, and we're only at the tipping point. In the past year, we've seen generative AI become very much more mainstream, whereas previously, the average employee didn't have access to AI in support of their day-to-day operations. Now any employee could go into ChatGPT and come up with new ways to create a letter to outreach to a prospect or a PowerPoint using visuals. So what we're seeing from this is with mainstream AI, there needs to be that governance layer at the employee level. Many businesses were striving for this at the business level, the organization level, but with ChatGPT bringing things mainstream, that's all changed. And this isn't a function of AI development. It was the introduction of an interface with a technology that had existed in a while. So just making that technology available is really what's caused this acceleration. So if we talk a little bit about the potential with generative AI, there's some very exciting things happening here that are going to allow businesses to scale much more quickly than the advancements we've seen with traditional ML. With generative AI, we're able to use unlabeled data in the setup of the model, which requires more time and investment and a strict data governance layer. But the result is those generative models can be applied to new use cases. They can continue to be used in order to extend the lifetime of the model, as opposed to the training that would have to be done to create a new model. So once the model is created, it really comes down to a matter of fine-tuning. The investment is upfront, but the potential for that model is much greater. Because the models are much more advanced, they're also subject to new types of risk, which increases the focus on governance. And so recently at IBM, we announced new solutioning in this area with Watson X at our Think conference. Watson X includes an enterprise platform with 3 key components. And I'll lead you through a use case to kind of talk through this. The first is at the AI level when the model is requested by the business at the very beginning, and this is Watson X AI. So the request needs to be validated. Is this even a purpose that you should be using an AI model to support your business strategy? Once it's approved, the model needs to be trained, validated, tested before it can be deployed to production. The middle layer with watsonx.data is the ability to leverage a integrated data lake securely across any hybrid cloud, not only for purposes of testing the models, but ongoing data access throughout the model's lifecycle. And then with watsonx.governance, this is where it gets really exciting, right? Because this piece wraps around the other two. And with governance, you're looking at that entire life cycle of the model. It starts at the time it's requested, so you need an audit trail of that. Who requested the model, for what purposes, where is it going to be deployed? And the nice thing about the dynamics of this platform is that you don't need to be using IBM technology for all three components. And I'll go into a little bit of detail beyond that. But the types of model lifecycle workflows and ongoing monitoring of those models, leveraging technology to test for drift, bias, that can all be used on any tech. So regardless if you're an AWS shop or GCP or you're using a different data lake, the nice thing about this platform is we're able to meet our clients where they're at in the AI journey today, and it's not a rip and replace. So just to go into a little bit more detail about that, at the different pieces, with watsonx.ai, what we've done is leveraged 30 years of experience that IBM has in the AI space to create an out-of-the-box library of generative models. Some are developed by IBM research and data scientists trained with governed data. We're also including a library from Hugging Face, so that we're trying to bring in best practices of what's available in industry. The watsonx data piece allows us to interface with IBM's data lakehouse and provide secure access to data over any hybrid cloud. And then the watsonx governance piece allows us to do that ongoing monitoring throughout the entire model lifecycle. So as your organization needs to scale AI, there's really three key things to consider. One is how to operationalize AI with confidence. Now, the challenge here is that many organizations have been pretty slow to start the AI journey. These AI projects were typically run as siloed projects for a specific business purpose without an overarching governance strategy. And so what we see in many of the clients that we work with is there's some number of models deployed out in production today with various levels of controls associated with them. Oftentimes, we have to start with a catalog of inventorying what models are out there and for what purposes. Because with a siloed approach to AI, one of the biggest challenges is you may have models doing similar things in different geographies, requiring testing of those models, audits of those models. It can be very fragmented. With a holistic governance layer, you're able to scale a vetted operational process across the organization so that anytime a model is requested anywhere, it goes through an approved vetting process, first to determine if the model should go into production, should it even be built and authorized for production, and then follow a governed testing cycle so that it goes through all of the checks and balances prior to supporting business strategy and going out there. It's then when you can get into the effective monitoring pieces that will help to govern that model and ensure it's effective throughout its life cycle. The second challenge is really around managing AI risk and reputation. And so in this area, we're thinking about, when the model was originally tested and approved, is there any drift that happens? Is there changes to the data or bias that occurs? And there's technology available to flag these models real time before a loss event occurs because a model has changed the way that it's performing. This helps to mitigate unintended consequences of the use of AI. So if you think about businesses that have been in the news pervasively, having the best intentions, but then running into a customer privacy issue or an employee privacy issue, these are the types of things that we can mitigate for with a governed AI structure. And then finally, the current growing AI industry regulations. Now, the biggest challenge with regulations to date is that these have been umbrella regulations that talk about the goals of the legislation. So when you look at the EU AI Act or the AI Bill of Rights introduced in the United States, they have common themes in them where data privacy is of utmost importance. AI needs to be explainable. It needs to be free from bias. But they don't tell you how to get there, right? That's often part of the biggest challenge today. And so that's by intention. The intention is that very detailed regulations will be written to support the goals of that legislation, but all of that takes time, right? And so we're hearing that it's quite likely the EU AI Act will be enacted by the end of this year, which will leave a period of a couple of years before it goes into effect. And similar to GDPR, organizations using AI are going to need to work very quickly to be in compliance once you have the level of detail required. So the benefit to setting up an AI governance structure now is that you would have the supporting pieces in place so that when those details from regulation come into play, the organization is then ready to execute. You're not starting at the strategy level. You've already got the pieces that can be filled in. So this is the official IBM definition of AI governance. And I always equate this to the Peter Parker principle. If you know who Peter Parker is, he's Spider-Man. And the principle is, with great power comes great responsibility. And that's what we're really talking about here. Everyone knows that AI has the ability to transform the way that employees do their jobs, the way that businesses interact with their customers, enables businesses to move along their digital transformation journey in support of 24/7 business opportunities. I mean, that's a lot. And so you need to be able to trust the models and the application of those models within the organization in order to drive that strategy forward and scale with confidence. I mentioned the EU AI Act. One key highlight to point out here is that it already has teeth in it, right? So accountability goes up to the C-level, specifically the CEO level, where any organization found in violation is subject to penalties of $30 million or 6% of a company's global revenue. And that's huge. But again, it doesn't give you the details on how to avoid that because more regulation needs to be written. However, it's a good attention getter because what it says is, start thinking about this now. When you do have the details, you don't want to be one of the first examples of someone who got it wrong. So I'm going to talk about the watsonx governance piece a little bit of our watsonx platform. I talked about some of the challenges here, the AI lifecycle being one of them. Being able to govern an operational process across the organization and have an audit trail in place removes a lot of the black box aspect of trying to track down information later about who approved a model, when it was approved, how long it's been out there. If these details are buried in email or on SharePoint, it's going to be really hard to put together an audit trail if there is a loss event or at the time when the models are subject to some sort of regulatory review. Managing reputational risk is another big part of where you need to establish confidence. And so, especially with generative AI, because these models are subject to new types of risk. Hallucinations, for example, is nothing that we thought about in previous ML. The ability to have confidence in how the models are operating as they change over time is table stakes for being able to adopt an effective AI governance program. And finally, the regulatory piece and the ability to transform requirements into policies and procedures that are understood by employees and effectively executed throughout the organization. So we actually saw in the United States about 2 years ago, very prescriptive regulations starting to be passed at the local level. And it happened in the state of New York, in New York City proper, looking at how AI is used to make hiring and promotional decisions that affected employees. And this is a law that went into effect a little earlier this year that New York is actively auditing for. IBM became client zero for the process and structure that I'm talking about today. Essentially, we worked in collaboration with our Chief Privacy Office and Chief Data Office in order to implement a workflow that considered the regulatory requirements, IBM's policies and procedures to support those requirements, and the controls that we have in place in order to be sure that the models are operating in a way that's free of bias as we're making privacy hiring decisions. And so as a result of that, we took a lot of the requirements that went through meeting that piece of legislation to create best practices that we share with our clients. One of those was the creation of an ethics board, because technology alone isn't going to ensure effective governance. You need to have the appropriate stakeholders included. You know, we looked at the EU Act with the teeth that it has in terms of the fines that can be charged. So you need to have inclusion from that CEO level so they understand the risk and the investment needed in order to effectively govern AI and adopt these models successfully. HR was another one. Chief Marketing Officer, as the use of AI impacts marketing risk. Information technology from a cybersecurity perspective, certainly. So if you compare that along with the Chief Risk Officer, the Chief Compliance Officer, to AI being run as a project and governed by work that data scientists are doing and then promoted, it's suddenly gotten a lot bigger in order to be ready for legislation. And so what we've seen since then is similar regulations been proposed in other states and other cities, and this could become a very expanding problem for businesses that operate for the US on the national level, but certainly globally as well. Because if you think of all of the requirements that went into GDPR for data privacy, the use of AI models is just as sensitive. And so being able to effectively define those requirements and then leverage them as other legislation goes into effect that you're subject to is going to allow you to scale. And that's really a key piece here. So a few key things to consider in order to get started with AI governance. You know, one is there's no one solution because everyone's in a different place. The important thing is to have an AI strategy that's supported by good data governance, because without information architecture, there's no AI. Without IA, there's no AI. You need that confidence in data. So engaging the right stakeholders, as I mentioned, with representatives from the different areas across the organization in order to create that framework by which all decisions around AI use is governed is key. And then evaluating your current AI technologies and processes is the next major piece. Because ideally, you're able to leverage technology that you have in place today and fill in for gaps. We have an entire consulting group that supports advisory sessions, and we have innovation labs where we collaborate with clients on where they are in AI today and where they'd like to go. And a lot of our product ideas come out of those collaborations. But the key thing there is being able to identify where are your gaps and how do you optimize and fill in for those gaps. An AI health check is something that is an easy point of reference where you can quickly get an understanding of what risks you may have or where you may go to if you overcome some of the problems that you're seeing today. And then finally, creating a set of automated governance workflows. And that only comes once you've established a best practice for all of this. So that's getting away from siloed projects. That's working with an AI ethics board or a governance committee so that you've clearly stated how the organization will use AI, what are your goals for using AI, and then replicating that with every request that comes in, which again can't really be done through email approvals or tracking information on SharePoint. So we would love to talk with you more about this today. As you walk through the exhibit hall, there's vendors everywhere talking about, optimizing AI and creating competitive advantage. This is an area where we've made a lot of investment and are definitely very passionate about. So I thank you all for listening today. I think we do have a few minutes to take questions.
Heather, thank you very much. Excellent overview of what IBM are doing. Does anyone have a question for Heather? We've got the mics in the room. We've got a lady right down here at the front. Sorry, just wait for a microphone so people can hear you, please.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. My name is Emily. I'm from Jupiter Asset Management. So my question is the whole auditing point of view. People hate that extra element. So in terms of auditing, can we use AI to have an audit chain secured, or do we need other platforms that would then be responsible for having that chain? Because I think that's going to be a huge barrier to onboarding, is everyone feels that they have to then log absolutely everything they've done related to AI on a separate platform.
Right. So one of the approach that we took, right, is to log that entire workflow. So as the request comes in, who approves it, what was the purpose of the model, and then we also use other AI tools, like we have a fact sheets piece, which is basically like a dynamic model card, which is collecting information about the model throughout its life cycle and creating that audit trail for you. And then I think the other interesting thing that our enterprise watsonx does is it has a governance layer where you can access those audit trails through an interface to help with that integrated audit process because it's supported by the OpenPages GRC tool. So it's being proactive in bringing that information together as it's happening. And then the other piece that helps a lot is the proactive monitoring. So if there is an alert that potentially there's bias or drift in a model, there's a record of when that alert was found, right? And then you could do an investigation of what may have changed in the model. But tracking that issue in correlation with the rest of that workflow becomes a key piece of the value, and making all of that a lot easier to manage from an audit standpoint. Because you're right, audit is often an afterthought, right? They come in and they have to sift through all of these details in order to understand what happened. And we're being more proactive about it from the beginning. Yes.
Yeah, very good. I think audit will very quickly not be an afterthought. Any other questions for Maria? Yeah, there's a lady right at the back over there. Thank you.
Hi, that was great. I love that you keep mentioning bias, but I was just wondering, how does this work in theory? And like as you mentioned, you source your data sets from various sources, but we know that these are heavily skewed anyway. Are IBM investing in diversifying that data to optimize watsonx to actually make these assessments as good as they can be?
Yes. So when I talk about the out-of-the-box generative AI library that's available with watsonx AI, it is built and trained on governed data because that is the foundational layer, right? And from there, because these are generative models, you do have to do ongoing monitoring because as data changes over time, there's new risks. So I'd say to your point, it's now more important than ever that the data governance layer being used to train those models is something that you have complete confidence in. Because with ML, that's always been a risk. If the data wasn't good, the results of the model are never going to be something you can be confident in. That's the black box right there. So we've done a lot of work with the data that we're using. We've started to branch out into even synthetic data to help solve for some of those challenges.
Fantastic. Heather, thank you very much. That was a great overview of what IBM are doing. So let's say thanks to Heather. Thank you.
Thank you.